Well, hey everybody, it's Bugeater64 here, and what we're going to do today is a replay of last night's stream, which was a discussion. Cajun Josh, one of my fellow streamers and flight simmers, who's also a rotor head like myself, loves helicopters. What we did was we did a discussion last night talking about the different flight simulators and primarily X-Plane 11, the helicopters that are in it, and how they pair up with DCS World's helicopters, which was a bit of an unfair comparison because DCS World for the most part builds study level type aircraft and helicopters, where X-Plane 11 develops a flight simulator for the masses. I mean, any level. It doesn't matter if you're a first timer, beginner, to maybe even a real world airline pilot or helicopter pilot. So this was the discussion that we did, and I hope you enjoy it. And we'll see you on the inside.
Seconds to get going here, but we're going to try for something different today. I don't know that the stream has already started. It should have, so hopefully the audio levels are good. I bet you guys can't figure out what we're going to talk about today. So we've got some old logos down here, but they're still relevant, like Bell Simtech. We know that group is absorbed into DCS. We're talking about X-Plane. If you guys will notice over here, the brand new flight simulator logo. So this is going to be, again, a little bit different. Today we're going to be joined by a very special individual. He makes a lot of videos on his YouTube channel, which you can find at Bugeater64 on YouTube. Just search for him. He does a lot of just laid back, relaxed, long flights for virtual airlines. And to try and avoid being political, because Bug really isn't that political, but in a day and age where some pilots can't figure out what gender they want to identify or even what species they want to identify as, Bug is just a grounded individual with a lot of life experience who likes to fly. And even when I don't have time to necessarily watch an entire stream that Bug is doing from start to finish, because he will stream, an entire lengthy flight sometimes, it's worth it just to show up for the first 5 minutes of the video, because it's always so much excitement, energy, enthusiasm on simply aviation. So, Bug, you have a history in the Army of jumping out of these, the Huey a lot, and as well as some other ones. But helicopters, you've got a lot of experience in the military and around the helicopters. Never actually been a pilot before, but just like myself, grown up around aviation and just have a huge enthusiasm for it. But you actually have some hands-on time with some of these aircraft.
True.
All right. So let's go in here with Bug here. So what I want to... Oh, sorry.
I've been around aviation most of my life. I had an uncle who actually helped design and develop aircraft like the Douglas DC-6, the B-36 bomber, the B-58 Hustler, and actually worked on the Atlas rocket program, things like that. So I grew up with this, in my mind, great individual who showed me all kinds of stuff. And then, of course, 20 years in the United States Air Force in special operations. I spent hundreds of hours in the Huey, Black Hawk, the Loach, a number of different helicopters. I just love them. Can't get away from them. Okay,
I got that a little bit wrong then. I was thinking Army, so Air Force. And Hellfire, we'll get to that, but no, I have not purchased it. So Bug and I both enjoy flying the helicopters. Bug flies a lot of other stuff. I really just kind of stick to helicopters. I noticed during some of these videos that Bug has been doing a lot of review series lately. Hey, Hitman, that Bug was, I don't want to say struggling a little bit, but just maybe a little bit dusty behind the controls of some of the helicopters with the hovering. And to his credit, he flies a ton of stuff that I couldn't even get started on the runway. And when it comes to hovering and aircraft at low speeds, that's pretty much all I do. So I'm glad to have Bug here to talk about his feelings towards the aircraft and translate some of the what appears to be some of the dance, if you will, of Bug versus some of his helicopters he was flying. And he was flying a multitude of different aircraft, all with a lot of different personalities. I want to talk about the different simulators that are coming out or that are currently out there. And what when it comes to the rotor heads, we're kind of in a niche community, in a small community of flight simmers. The rotor heads are definitely, you're really narrow focusing it down. So we're going to have some imagery of, this is from Bug's channel here in the background with him and the Huey, and you're about to see him lose a rotor because he's about to mass bump here in just a second. But you're going to see him flying a couple different helicopters. So the first thing I want to talk about, Bug, is obviously Bug and I both have experience with the DCS UH-1 Huey, which does not have, other than hydraulic systems, it doesn't supplement the pilot at all with any type of electronic system trying to figure out what you're doing. Now here Bug is just got
no stabilization system to assist. It's all hands.
Now, that being said, I don't know how much experience you have. There goes that mass bump. Now, with and rotor betrayal. I've done a lot of flying in the Mi-8 as well, and that does have a stability system. And without it, that helicopter just likes to wobble and just wander around in the skies, almost like it's a dead whale. Whereas with the flight system on, it still is a difficult helicopter to hover. It still will require you to be constantly on the controls. And it is difficult to master that helicopter, but it is definitely noticeably easier when the flight control system or the stability enhancing system is online, and it is easier to hover and do those fine maneuvers once you get the hang of the Mi-8 than it is to get the Huey. So what I wanted to talk about is, I'm obviously looking for a new sim, and X-Plane 11 is the only alternative that's out there right now with what looks like some decent helicopters. And I feel like, from what I've seen, not having been behind the controls in X-Plane since X-Plane 10 back in, say, 2012, when I used to fly an EC-135, and I believe it was Dreamfoil's AS-350 B3, those helicopters, just watching, don't seem to have the same flight modeling. They don't seem to have the inertia and the weight of the aircraft or the reaction to air that these helicopters do. When I'm flying a DCS Huey or an Mi-8, I feel like I'm flying an aircraft that is suspended from a rotor disc, and it's reacting in such a way, and I'm constantly having to balance that helicopter and control that rotor disc. And what I wanted to talk to Bug about is someone who's actually flown the helicopters in both DCS and X-Plane. Are there any in X-Plane that do feel accurate to you, that do have kind of mimic that feeling that we get in DCS, where the helicopter seems to be difficult, it seems to be fighting you, but if you can master it, you're always dancing with it, but she kind of dances with you, versus that almost Xbox or PlayStation console type feeling of the helicopter is artificial and they really didn't model it well. Are there any helicopters in DCS that feel, or I'm sorry, in X-Plane that feel the same way as DCS to you?
No. In saying that, and I think one of the big differences is the fact that DCS World makes primarily study level type aircraft. You have to know the systems. They're modeled after the actual aircraft, much closer than just about any helicopter I found in X-Plane. That being said, X-Plane also is set up for just about any level of user, a flight simmer, from the beginner to the expert, to be able to fly these aircraft. The UH-60 Blackhawk version that I fly in this test, and during these tests, these comparisons that I was doing, I was really trying to see if X-Plane helicopters had VRS situations, if you could put them into a VRS, which for those that don't know is a vortex real estate, which is basically you stall the rotor and you fall out of the sky. In DCS World, that's something we have to be constantly aware of, because the Huey, the Mi-8, any of them, you can very easily, if you're not paying attention and you're slowing down to lose altitude or to land, whatever, you can put yourself into VRS and not be able to get out of it. The X-plane situations, I was not able to ever truly simulate VRS state.
Okay, so VRS obviously isn't modeled well, or if at all, in X-Plane 11. So let's talk about maybe some of the reasons why X-Plane 11 does feel different and get your thoughts on that. One of the things that has to be noted is the Huey. A primary aircraft that we fly a lot in DCS was obviously meant to replace the Bell 47, which was used in the, I believe it was the Korean War. It was designed in the 50s and came out in the 60s, and it's a very old helicopter, whereas a lot of the X-plane aircraft are very modern by comparison, 20, 30, 40 years newer than the Huey, and have a lot of electronic systems where you are flying the aircraft either through a computer or the computer is right there next to you in that co-pilot seat helping you fly that aircraft. And when you get that feeling behind the cyclic and the collective, is there, outside of VRS not being modeled, do you feel like X-Plane, could we give them some leeway in the fact that some of the aircraft are just newer and maybe they would fly like that in the real world, where they those electronic systems like stability enhancement systems or augmentation systems would be helping you out a little bit? Or would you still say the flight models just aren't very accurate?
Well, again, the flight models do fairly well in many of them, but again, they're designed that anybody that wants to fly a helicopter can probably fly X-Plane 11 helicopters, and as long, it's very easy to pick the helicopter up, get it going in a straight line. They don't have the rotor tail torque as dramatic as we find with the DCS World aircraft. So the systems, almost every single helicopter in X-Plane has either the Garmin 530 and autopilot systems, and the freeware helicopter, the Bell 429 I was playing with today, actually you can use the Garmin, where the GTN 750 in it, which is a heck of a navigational system. So yeah, these modern helicopters are much easier to handle than when we're flying the Huey. I think that's why I like the Huey better, because it's all hands-on, and there's no such thing as in my mind, there's no such thing as an autopilot for that bird.
Okay, so definitely they're easier to fly in X-Plane 11. Part of that may be the realism and the flight modeling, and part of that may be the systems. So you're saying basically the stability augmentation systems do take a little bit of the challenge out of the aircraft, but you still feel that the flight, like the characteristics of the rotor, the anti-torque rotor, something you brought up. Because interestingly enough, you're flying in the background right now, the video, the audience is seeing you flying the S-76. And in actuality, Hellfire was streaming the other day and demonstrated for me, did a darn barrel roll in this helicopter. The helicopter may very well be capable of a loop under certain conditions, but not a barrel roll, not without doing some damage to the helicopter.
Right.
He just did a barrel roll. And not only did he do a barrel roll, he did a barrel roll starting at like 400 or 500 feet. And he's like, literally while he's doing the barrel roll, saying, I don't think I should be able to do this. And so, you got like one or two alarms in the cockpit going off, but there's so many ways to tear off the rotor of a helicopter that the damage modeling is definitely much better in DCS. Obviously, it's a combat simulator. Yeah. But I also feel like that's where I want to try and give X-Plane a fair shake. The Huey is unique in the fact that it's got that teetering rotor system. It's susceptible to mass bump, whereas, like I said, a lot of these helicopters are newer. But I think you hit it. The SAS definitely makes a difference, but you still feel like the tail rotor is not very well modeled, and some of the other inertia weight.
The thing is to remember is that the S-76 is actually a helicopter that comes with the program. It's part of Laminar research. So it's come a long way. They've done some updating of the cockpit. and so on. So it's gotten better.
And and I'm looking at that right now, and you say that, and that's awesome that they are working on it. But I'm looking at the cockpit, I'm like, wow, this is nowhere near the quality. These gauges, at least, maybe I'm seeing something different than what you saw, because obviously we're watching your stream right now, and there's compression and stuff like that when the videos were rendered. But these gauges and this quality, the cockpit's nowhere near what we see in the MI8 or the DCS Huey.
No, it's not.
Okay, so then let's go talk about something else. One of the other things that I've seen, and this goes hand in hand with the unrealistic flight models, is one of the things I've seen guys when they're streaming and they're doing reviews of these helicopters is they're sinking out of the air like crazy, and they just pull back on that cyclic pull back on that collective, and the helicopter just, whoop, I'm coming right back again, and it's like, okay, come on now. And obviously there's some a lack of proper flight modeling there. But on the flip side, a lot of these helicopters are twin-engine helicopters. So with your experience in the backseat of something like the Huey versus the Black Hawk, let's say that the modeling is not as accurate as DCS, but again, can we give X-Plane a little bit of a break because some of these helicopters are going to be a lot more powerful than the Huey? Or is that just still something that we chalk up to horrible flight modeling?
I wouldn't say horrible flight modeling, but it's like in this particular video that we're watching, where I did this comparison, in every one of these landings, I was trying to get the helicopter in a VRS state. So I had, like, it told me I had a beautiful landing there, but I actually landed on my left wheel first. So, there's that. But again, as I was coming down, even I was at points where I was at 2,000 feet a minute sink rate. And just before I get to the ground, if I yank up on that collective, I can slow it way down and like it's nothing. And where in a real helicopter,
So you feel like that's pretty inaccurate, even despite the fact that there's two engines working.
Yeah.
To achieve.
You get into a 2,000, 2,500 foot sink rate, and at say 40, 50 feet off the ground, yank back on the collective, you're gonna barely.
Yeah. So obviously, okay. So then let's take VRS out of the equation for a second, because obviously vortex ring state. Once a helicopter's in its own column of unclean air, the blades can't get into a good stream. They can't establish lift. But outside of that, if you do have forward momentum, would we say, and this brings into the next bullet point here, because we'll talk about it, again, the Huey is a two-bladed rotor system with a first-generation turbine that's underpowered. We've got twin engines on a lot of these helicopters. We've got the electronic system, and we've got four-bladed rotor systems. So all things factored in there, would we say that some of the performance is decently modeled outside of VRS with these helicopters because they would have the twin engine, the four-blade rotor systems, and whatnot?
One, they're much faster, and their capabilities are better than the Huey in many respects. So like this, we're getting ready. I'm starting up the Black Hawk, the civilian version. It flies great. It really does. But the Black Hawk also flies differently than most other helicopters, because the Black Hawk, you actually fly more like an airplane than you do a helicopter. And so where in the Huey, even in DCS, we give it 100% power. And then we use the collective and lift off and fly to where we're going. In the Black Hawk, you have to more closely match power with collective to keep everything in the green so that you don't burn up and destroy the engines. So there's a little finesse there, and that it's a bit of a challenging helicopter.
Okay, so then the next thing I want to talk about is rotor animations, which ironically, here we go, because you're literally looking at the rotor animations.
And that's why I showed those, because I knew you were interested.
And so, because I don't know, a lot of guys may be the same as I am. I love to sit there and go external view on my helicopter when I'm just flying around and take a look at that rotor blade. And one of my biggest complaints in or what I've seen from X-Plane at least, is that a lot of these helicopters basically they do like series of animations. They'll do a just getting started animation, a slightly spooled up animation, then it just clips into like a full blown animation, and then it's like a full blown like a ground idle. Then you've got like a flight idle blur animation to them. Some of them actually have a beautiful blur, and I will give I think it's Dreamfoil's 407 the best credit. Like that thing looks amazing.
That one is the best of all the helicopters I've flown in X-Plane.
And they did
When
basically
you get outside and watch it actually spool up. It's got the best one.
It's got the best
jump for like
the best transitions there.
It does. It truly does.
In X-Plane or in DCS, you really get a feel for the rotor spinning on the Huey, at least when you're in first person watching it, if you have good frame rates. And that's the big problem right now with DCS is the VR, at least where I fly all the time. You know, you're lucky to get 40 to 45 frames per second. I can be idling on the ground with a 2080 Ti and a Ryzen 7 1800X with 32 gigs of 2400 megahertz RAM. It's not a bad system. All that stuff's cooled by water. And I'm getting 20 FPS at Sakumi on a multiplayer server. So it really is hard to notice that now. But the transitions are very smooth all the way up, and they look good. The MI8 looks really good. I noticed that the 407 looked great. It had that beautiful, when it's at flight idle, beautiful. Basically, all blades were modeled as a blur, and they move in slow motion around the helicopter to simulate that kind of frame rate of a helicopter being captured by a camera. They look really good. Some of the other aircraft, like even the Payware, like the AW139, which had a good-looking system, but it almost, I hate that, like that choppy look, like where they basically kind of move the rotor around and then like chop it, move it around again. One of the weird ones was the 429 and the 412 were modeled this way. In the real world, they do almost look wobbly. When you watch them, the rotor hub does look almost wobbly, but they seem to really exaggerate that in the 429. And so, so basically, if you, rate them for me? The 407 is the best. What's the worst that you flew in this recent series in X-Plane as far as animations for the aircraft?
Well, it's hard to say because they're all very close. The 407 also had the very best sound transitions of any of them, as far as spooling up the sound. When you made a bank with that helicopter, the rotor changed pitch in sound, and you could really see, and which made you almost feel the difference. Let's see. The worst, I'm trying to think. There's one that didn't change. It may be the 412. I'm not sure. That where it didn't change sound at all.
And I've never been in a 412 in the interior of one when it's running. But man, it just whistle. Like they really accentuate that whistle. That's all you hear is that whistle. And when I watch videos of those things approaching, you hear the rotor just as much as you hear the turbine. So it seems like that maybe I don't know. It's that's Trident, I think. Maybe Trident could work on the sounds a little bit. They've got a beautiful helicopter. Maybe just work on their sounds a little bit.
Now the 429, looking from the outside, when you're looking at the main rotor, it's probably the worst.
As far as that wobble.
That wobble. God almighty. If it wobbled that much in real world, it'd fall off.
So, and that's the next bullet point. We've already kind of started on that. So these are smooth transitions for me. Is the best sounds. The 407, I tend to agree with you. Unless you have, now you don't use it, but the sound pack for the Huey in DCS makes the Huey sound amazing. You can hear the turbine. Oh, you do.
It's awesome.
You hear the electric whir of that starter. You hear the fuel being introduced. And it's not like any of the aircraft. Even the 407, it puts to shame in my mind because you hear fuel being introduced, you hear the engine spool up, and you hear the engine spool up from 1% to 100%. There is no quick transition, whereas they kind of hide it in the 407, but it is there where you can kind of hear it clip from one RPM range to another at certain points. The one that I was...
And the Huey, it takes almost a full 30 seconds.
One of the ones
that to spool
that I was least impressed with was the 429's interior sounds. It just sounds like sometimes it's hunting or trying to catch. Another one that I think sounded really good, but also had a weird quirk to it, you can kind of maybe you noticed this or didn't, was the 139, when you're flying it, it seems like every once in a while they artificially put like some blade rotor flap in there, just like it randomly happens no matter what you're doing.
Yeah, I noticed that. There was, you're sitting there, and it's almost like somebody was standing outside the fuselage hitting it with a hammer.
Yeah, I noticed
weird smacking sounds.
You talked about before. One of the times that it sounded similar to me is like a lot of times when you unload the rotor on some of these helicopters, and that wind, that blade pitch changes and that RPM changes, and suddenly you hear that flap, and you kind of, the 407 accurately does it, but it seemed like the 139 just did it randomly to kind of make you pay attention to the rotor when you're flying straight and level, nothing's happened. It was almost like, oh, it's being hit by a gust of wind or something, but it was not predictable at all. And so I think that maybe that's just a default sound that loops, and I don't know, it just didn't seem. So another one that sounds, I think we both agree the 407's, but probably the DCS Huey is the best with regard to sounds, and the MI8's right there with it.
It's hard to compare them.
Yeah. On the X-Plane side, I guess we'd say 407 probably the best. And then if you had to rate a second place, who gets that?
It might be the VFDG UH-60 Blackhawk.
Okay. That's what I'm not familiar with. But so
that's what I'm flying right now in the video.
The next thing I was going to ask about are the cockpit interiors. That's where I want to pull up. I'm going to scrub here. God, this is a beautiful skin on this girl. But the helicopter, the external modeling on this one really had my interest. I thought it was free.
That's the AW-139.
But beautiful, beautiful helicopter. I did not realize that AW got bought out by Leonard.
Yeah,
and
carries 12 passengers.
Yeah, this thing to me is like a great all-purpose aircraft. Like, this thing has the power to do whatever it wants to do. It has the capacity to do whatever it wants to do. I don't think it would be as fun to fly as the 407 if you're like, wanting to do some low.
A lot easier to fly than the 407.
Yeah, and the 407 to me would have a lot more personality, a lot more fun to fly at low altitudes and kind of just, slalom and move around. But I feel like this aircraft, if I want to do search and rescue and then I want to do VIP transport or fly for a virtual airline in the simulator, whatever I want to do, bad weather, this helicopter's built, it seems like, to do everything. And to me, the sounds are good in it. The pricing's not bad on it. But one thing that I'll notice, I think you'll hit here in a second, and this is where it gets me into another bullet point of talking points, is the best cockpit. There seems the MFDs in this thing, they look really dull to me, and I don't know if that was something that you noticed or not. But
well, see, I'm not a big component in helicopters for the glass cockpit. I prefer gauges.
So, do you find those but do they look good to you when you're flying it? They look acceptable? Because to me, what I noticed about these is they looked really dull, whereas when you were flying the 429, I could see the reflections of the cockpit behind you in those. They looked really like nice, glossy finish. And I'm not familiar with a lot of these Garmin and MFD systems in the aircraft. I don't know if they intentionally made these things look dull because maybe that's just the type of paneling it was. But the 429s, which we'll see in a second, looked a lot different than the 139s.
Well, the ones in the 139, you can brighten them up. I just didn't do it. But I find, too, that in some cases, they're almost a little... If I have the old steam gauges like I have in the Huey or even in a couple of the other helicopters, it's easier to watch my angle of attack and things like that than some of these glass cockpit gauges.
Yeah, so we know Bug's not a fan of the glass cockpit. I love it. One of the things that DCS does really well and X-Plane does not do, but I do notice it in this aircraft to an extent, is in DCS, when you start to pull back on the collective, you see the rotor system load, and you can watch, especially in the Mi-8, if you turn the rotor tip lights on, which are just cool, Russian aircraft are really neat like that, but you can watch that rotor disc lift and start bending at the end. Most of the aircraft in this don't seem to do that at all. This one does, but not the same. This almost seems like it's a ridiculous transition, but this is one that I noticed where when you were flying here, that rotor disc is bent. And hopefully he'll go external here in a second, but you'll see that rotor disc is bent. Are there any other helicopters that model it? Now you can see that rotor disc is bent up a little bit. Are any of the other helicopters doing that, or is that the only one?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. A good number of them will show this loading.
Okay. So let's go ahead and move forward real quick to the you pulled that little surprise, and this is where I want to see. You can see the cockpit right now that I'm talking about with what you can see it's kind of dull. But if we move here, this one just looks so much crisper and cleaner. And I don't know, maybe that looks worse to someone who's actually in the game because it looks more gamey. But to me, just like I can see the reflections in the lighting on those displays. They just look really nice to me. I don't know, Bug, what's your feeling on that? Do you feel like the 139s were just fine and I'm just being picky? Or
Well, no, the 139 has a darker cockpit than the 429.
okay, so maybe it's just a lighting thing.
And it could be partly the lighting because in the previous 3 helicopters that I was flying, I hadn't updated the scenery for San Francisco. So I updated the scenery before doing the 429, and everything looked better.
This helicopter looks excellent on the outside. When that rotor is spooling up, this helicopter looks and then boom, that artificial wobble gets introduced, and it's like, oh, come on. Yeah. You guys are so close.
And a good point right there. You see how fast it went from like just kind of spooling up, and then all of a sudden it's almost like full power.
Yeah.
So it's too drastic.
The transitions aren't real good there. Yeah, this one, it seems like the transitions, the rotor wobble, and the interior cockpit sounds, I could see some adjusting done to them. Exterior sounds seem great. The exterior lighting on this one is beautiful. The strobes and everything on the tail, it looks really good. And the actual model of the helicopter itself, to me, looks really. I really like the 429 for like a rescue helicopter. It's just
it was a good helicopter.
So let's go to the best helicopter topic here. I guess we can do this. I want to take out the combat simulator kind of out of this because obviously the Huey, the DCS Huey, it's in a different realm and a different purpose. But if you're limited, Bug, to, let's say, flying with friends on a multiplayer server, logistics flying in DCS and not necessarily combat flying, but you could take any X-plane helicopter and move it over. Or you could, we'll put this in there, you could take the DCS Huey and bring it over to X-plane. Or Microsoft Flight Sim, which we're going to talk about in a minute. If I had to limit you to one helicopter, and that's going to be your helicopter to fly for, and not just because you love the helicopter, but with a purpose, doing SAR missions, doing police stuff, doing passenger carriers, doing your virtual airline stuff, considering cockpits, considering sounds, considering modeling, considering the performance of the helicopter, what is your favorite helicopter that you feel like, hey, because I know how much you love the Huey, and maybe the Huey's going to win out in this question, but if there's one of these that you've flown here recently, which one would you say, if I've got to only fly one for purposes, which one would that be?
Well, if you want to just fly one for fun, I would probably go with the 407.
Okay.
Because it's probably the most demanding of the X-plane helicopters to fly. It's very reactive to control input, and which we're not looking at the video, but when I did the video showing flying around Honolulu through the city and zipping between buildings and everything else, it's very, very reactive. It's a lot of fun to fly, really. Especially with the sound transitions and everything else. It was a lot of fun. If you want something where you're actually going to be doing a job, I would probably look at the AW-139 because of its size and its capabilities as a rescue helicopter, and for police work and things like that. So.
Okay. Yeah, this helicopter just seems beautiful. If it was just bigger, these people obviously know how to build a really nice simulator and a really nice helicopter. So the 139 for general purposes is your go-to. You like that more than the 429. I'm surprised to hear you like that more than your Blackhawk. And then the 407 just for fun. And obviously I think I know which one wins out on military sims.
Let me think.
So
Now, there is a new helicopter in development for X-Plane 11, and it is actually the UH-1 Huey. There's a company that is developing it for X-Plane. So
Okay.
it'll be and so far, what I've seen, it looks like they're going to be almost study level, if not study level, which would be great.
So something I want to ask, the next point, Sim Future. But before we get to Sim Future, I want to ask you about the 407. I found an interesting comment or an interesting mention. I was watching a guy who was doing a flight in a 407, and it was an older video. And he specifically mentioned this helicopter is harder to fly than the DCS Huey. It's more of a challenging aircraft. And I was like, man, that goes against everything that I think I know about this from watching, but I acknowledge I haven't actually gotten behind these controls yet. As you who've flown both, was he way off base, or is there some merit to that? Is it just a different beast and a different animal? I mean,
I think it's, to me, the reason, if he felt it was more difficult than the DCS Huey, it's because of the way X-Plane has set up their control renderings. You can do a lot of adjustments. Like I use the Warthog, and it's superb, especially for helicopters and VR. But in DCS, you can really make very tiny incremental changes into how the controls react and how they work on an aircraft. You can do some of that with X-Plane, but not to the degree, I don't think.
So setting up control curves and setting up dead zones is impossible, or just not as easy in X-Plane, or you're limited?
It's not as precise. In DCS, we actually can set it up like 10% or 11%, very small increments. Where in X-Plane, when I've tried to build a curve for controls, there's a lot of guesswork in it. Just how much is this curve going to be? So it's not as precise. But I didn't find that this helicopter, in my mind, was more difficult than the DCS Huey.
Yeah, it surprised me when he said that, just because I know this one has a stability augmentation system in it, and I know the Huey doesn't, and so that kind of surprised me. And when I asked him in the video comments, he was an awesome guy. He responded there, but he said, yeah, he doubled down on that, and I was surprised, because it's just not anything that I've seen or anything that I.
Well, in this video that we're watching, this is the very first time I ever got into this helicopter.
Yeah, and you look like you weren't having trouble with it at all. Of course, the landings were a little bit different.
Yeah,
but
well,
that's just, you've never flown the thing before. So, I mean, you just bought a lot of these helicopters. I think the one thing that makes this helicopter better, Bug, is a glass cockpit. Some MFDs.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so then let's go back to the 429, because I really like this helicopter.
Yeah, the cockpit's insane in the 429. It's great.
I like the external. Like I said, take the rotor and fix it. And take the rotor and fix it, the sounds and fix it. I think it's one of the best ones they had. The flight model might not have been as accurate as maybe the 139. Or how did this compare to the 139 as far as flight model goes?
Plus, those MFDs, a lot of those buttons on the side are functional.
How did you feel about the flight model on this versus the 139? Or are they just too, because of size differences, are they just too different to compare?
I don't think they're that much. This was, I think, more nimble. I cranked a turn over at the Golden Gate Bridge.
Which was something that would have ripped the rotor right off the Huey had you done it.
Oh,
like, you would know that.
I would have died in a skinny minute and had to pay for a bridge. But, yeah.
And let's take a look at that, because that is, we'll go to that part real quick, because this is where we get into like some of the artificial. So I'll actually crank the audio up on this, and you guys can see what Bug did. And I was watching this. This is one of those times where I'm like, damn it. When you want to fly the helicopter accurately, you can fly the helicopter accurately. But
Check height.
when you don't want to fly the helicopter accurately, sometimes you do ridiculous stuff like this in X-Plane, and it just accepts it.
I didn't like the way it jerked that turn.
If I had done that in DCS, it would have been ugly.
And it's something else that we could hit on that we didn't talk about earlier is we talked about flight modeling and the way that DCS does it versus the way that X-Plane calculates things, which is X-Plane is all about how the aircraft interacts with air and aerodynamics, the fluid dynamics of air. But DCS does a hell of a lot more work on damage profiles for aircraft. There's a lot more ways you can hurt the helicopter, whereas I don't think X-Plane focuses anywhere near, especially a lot of these freeware devs, I don't think they focus anywhere near on damage to the helicopter. And so maybe that's part of the realism that we get. So then, this one is outside of what we were talking about here. The future of sims. DCS is very good at talking us up their new features and what's coming out. And sometimes, I like that transparency. Elite Dangerous did it where they said, hey, we're a year away from our next big update. We'll do some updates between them. And I respect the company for doing that. I think where DCS creates a little bit of tension sometimes with their base is that they here we go. It seemed like you got VRS in this one, but maybe you didn't.
I just cranked it down and said, let's see what happens. And then just before I get to the ground, yanked it back up.
And it worked. That's a beautiful helicopter. So the let's get you back while you're flying this one. The community, like I said, the VR update, they miss a lot of their deadlines. They tend to not talk about something like the Mi-24 in development. Then suddenly they talk about it a lot, and that's something to talk about. We know in the future we're looking at definitely Eagle Dynamics doing an Mi-24, which I think will be modeled and done very, very well. And then they want to do an F4 Phantom. And then after that F4 Phantom, they want to do I believe a G variant of the AH-1 Cobra. So I will fly the Mi-24 just because, hey, you've done it. I'm a rotor head. I love the helicopters, and since you guys have put the effort into it, I'm going to pay you to reward you for the work. Even though I'm not really as excited about that, I do think it will replace my Mi-8. I'm really excited about getting to fly the Cobra and that view, even though you can't really see right in front of you very well as like you can in the Huey. You can see off to your sides a hell of a lot better in those slim cockpits. And I'm looking forward.
That'll work out great for multi-crew.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to that. But then again, hey Sprague, I'm not really confident that we're going to see that in the near future.
No, I don't think so either.
And so then my question becomes, yeah, it has been a while, man. We're looking at those helicopters, but we have no idea when they're coming. X-Plane seems to have a lot more aircraft, a lot of payware, a lot of freeware. How often are they updating these helicopters? Is it monthly? Is it annually? How often do you see updates that you can actually notice?
I don't know if it's all part of each update that we get. Because right now we're flying X-Plane 11.34, and we'll probably see. I think one of the things they're waiting for, there's going to be a big change when a new system comes out. What is it? It's not Vulcan. Anyway,
okay.
I can't remember, but there's going to be a lot of changes coming before the end of this year.
Okay, so devs, we got Razbam who's tossing up the idea of a CH-53. Heatblur's never mentioned any interest in helicopters. On this side, we have Dreamfoil who makes good products. You've got X-Rotor out there. You've got Trident out there who all put it the payware stuff. Are there any other devs that kind of step in and out of the spotlight from time to time? Or are those pretty much the big three and that's kind of it for the payware helicopters? Or do you see devs come and go on X-Plane?
I think you see them pretty much. They come and go, but it's
because Dreamfoil is the one that I flew. Their East, I think it was their 135. I think it was theirs, but I can't say for certain. But I know the AS350. That is a gorgeous helicopter and those lights. The AS350 was Dreamfoil's, and so since I've been in the sim, they've obviously released the 407. And
Right, yeah.
I think it was Trident that did the 429, and then I don't even know. I think it was X-Rotor that did the 139. So there's been some new helicopters, but X-Rotor doesn't seem to have a lot of stuff. So it doesn't seem like a lot of these things. It seems like they're kind of slow as well. Would you say they're any faster or slower at deving than the on the Eagle Dynamics side, or about the same?
Oh, they're faster than Eagle Dynamics. Eagle Dynamics will, in some cases take 3 and 4 years to depend upon the complexity of the aircraft.
Spag, we're just filming a quick discussion on rotorcraft here. Okay, so what about the simulator itself? And this is where we're going to talk about Microsoft a little bit, because we've seen a teaser and we're waiting to hear information from E3, but
it's released in 2020.
It looks like they're coming back, and what their teaser video looked gorgeous, and Eagle Dynamics is guilty of it. X-Plane, I think, is also guilty of it. I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft's doing as well. They can produce some ridiculously high-quality images for their teaser videos, and when you get in the sim, it's like, okay, under the perfect conditions with a $7,000 or $8,000 rig, maybe you'd see that type of reflection and detail, but it's not what we see. But with regard to the two big names right now, DCS and Eagle Dynamics, who's pushing more updates to their core engine and their core game?
I think right now it is X-Plane. And they actually promote a lot of third-party assistance. A lot of our airports now that are three-dimensional were developed by people like myself, and then X-Plane actually went ahead and incorporated them into the simulator, updating the airports.
Okay, interesting. So they're much more. DCS is much different as far as license. If you're a dev and you want to make an add-on, you've got to get licensed for that add-on. There's obviously military information and accuracies. They're a pain in the butt to get anything. And I'm not knocking Eagle Dynamics for that. They definitely want to control their ecosystem and make it accurate. I applaud them for that, but it's definitely a lot more red tape. And it's interesting that X-Plane has a completely different approach to that. So let's talk about, to me, I am not a big tube in the sky guy. And so I like helicopters. I like flying around busy airports and flying with friends and stuff like that. And that was interesting that the flight sim that seems to hit that the most was always Microsoft Flight Sim. Now DCS, you do fly with friends, but you have a reason to. But you can fly by yourself just fine and engage and stuff. And there's reasons to fly in teams. But FSX definitely seemed to be very multiplayer centric. DCS, I think, is right there with them, if not the number one now. A lot of people seem to be migrating over that way as FSX is over 10 years old now. But X-Plane, when I was in at 10, they were saying, hey, we're not really interested in VR at this time. That's obviously changed.
Right.
They were also...
So has multi-crew. That has changed.
So they actually have multi-crew now.
There are a couple plugins for it, and it's something that X-Plane is actually working towards, so that we can have two people actually flying the same aircraft.
Okay, so the two people flying the same aircraft.
Yeah, pilot, co-pilot, that type of deal.
So we get into speculation here, but one of the things I really feel like their multiplayer system is as far as other aircraft out there being flown by players. Right now there's ways, I guess, third-party add-ons and or direct connecting to people where you have to forward IPs and whatnot or unlock IPs. Kind of a complicated, convoluted process, and it's definitely doesn't seem to where it's geared. I don't know how many people you can connect on X-Plane
I don't either, because I've never really done it.
You've been flying for a long time, and it's just not something, whereas on DCS, you fly with us all the time in multiplayer server. So this is speculative, but do you see X-Plane moving in that direction at all? Are they moving, if they are?
I think so, because I think they realize that the community, it's something the community wants. And they're more receptive to listening to what the community wants and making those changes.
So let's Are they moving that direction at a snail's pace, or is it like a snowball rolling down the side of a snowy mountain where it might be moving slow now, but we might be picking up speed as we gain mass and momentum and move that direction? What do you see it as, or is it always going to be a snail's pace towards that?
More like a snail's pace that gets run over by a small snowball.
Okay, so, and this is one that I didn't have down there, but if you've got to pick a winner for a sim, we'll do both now and future. As of right now, if you can only fly one sim, which I have a feeling it's going to be X-Plane, but what sim is it if I tell you can only do one?
X-Plane 11.
Okay, and that's because you enjoy I'm assuming the virtual airlines and flying some of your older aircraft, just the variety that's not there in DCS.
Yeah, plus the availability of third-party, both freeware and for both scenery packs, aircraft, things like that. There's much more availability than you'll find in Prepared or even FSX. FSX, of course, is still only 32-bit, where X-Plane 11 is 64. Prepared is now 64. But at the same time, there's some issues with Prepared that they're still working out.
I
have the availability of the aircraft that we have in X-Plane.
And I didn't really bring up Prepared, but I'm curious about that since you have some knowledge about that. Does that have any multiplayer functionality in it whatsoever?
I think they've got like multi-cockpit for airlines and things like that. But I don't know how it's set up. The other issue with Prepared, if you want to be legal, Prepared was designed not so much as a flight sim for the average person, but for the flight student. And that's where their licensing comes in, big question. If you can show them or tell them and be honest about it, if you're a flight student, you can get it for $60 some odd. But for the average Joe, you and me, that aren't flight students and not private pilots, the license is well over $100.
And then the third-party stuff is just not there like it is in an X-Plane.
Not yet. They're trying.
Okay.
But that being said, like you say, we got the teaser for Microsoft Flight Simulator that's supposed to be released in 2020. My big question about that, as beautiful as it looked, am I going to be able to use my old FSX aircraft in that simulator, or do you have to suddenly buy all brand new aircraft?
My question is going to be the flight modeling in that. Are we going to see accurate? Or are we going to see something that's dumbed down for gamers? And that's going to be my question. So then, future prediction. If obviously currently right now, X-Plane is where if you had to pick a sim. Let's say that a year from now we've got the Syria map or whatever else they're going to release on us for DCS and maybe some VR improvements and updates. X-Plane, I'm assuming, will still be in 11. I don't know how far they go before they actually release a new version.
They're talking about X-Plane 12, but we don't know when.
Okay. So
that's a few years at least down the road.
So if we have FSX out, does that change your opinion on which sim you'd pick, or would it still be X-Plane 11 or 12 at that point?
It would still be X-Plane 11 for civilian use. You know, DCS is going to be, I will say it, my forever military type simulator, because I don't see anything taking its place. But as far as civilian aircraft and flight modeling at this point and for the near foreseen future, I would be X-Plane 11.
Okay, and then the last question is performance. I wish we don't have any information on FS the new flight sim from Microsoft. So I guess we could talk about. Have you done Prepared 3D at all?
No, because I don't own it.
Okay, so then performance between DCS and X-Plane. Is there a clear winner, or are they hand in hand with regards to the system that you have versus the FPS you see?
As far as the flight modeling and the flight characteristics, in my mind, the best is DCS World. Both fixed wing and.
I'm sorry. I obviously didn't ask that question correctly. As far as I meant, as far as your computer horsepower goes, which sim do you? Are they just too close to call, or is it really dependent? Because I know X-Plane, you can really do a lot with the scenery, but as far as similar visual graphics, is there a clear winner in which sim produces a higher frame rate?
Oh, X-Plane.
Okay, so X-Plane. Okay. So when you've got similar graphics out of both of them, X-Plane produces the better frame rates.
Yeah.
Okay, so hopefully that'll change with the DCS. So for everybody who stopped by, that was Bugeater64 there. We just wanted to go over a talk. If I end up seeing that this format has, if it produces a decent amount of video feedback and or interest, then we very well may do some more of these in the future because we've definitely got some really knowledgeable guys in the Discord. As far as I want to wait to the end because we're right at 53 minutes now because wow, time flies.
It does. That went by quick. Jeez.
Yeah, well, you're talking about a passion. So
True.
Thanks everybody for stopping by. Thank you, Bug, for all the work you've put into this.
My pleasure.
And we'll see you guys all around very soon. I'm gonna maybe I can get this for the thumbnail. Ching! Hey, thumbnail. If I hold my hands out like this long enough, can you get the thumbnail like this? Because this would be a great thumbnail right here. Thumbnail.
Well, that was something different. I hope you enjoyed it. It was just our opinions and about what's going on with helos in flight sims, and we welcome any opinions that you may have. Just something different, a little different format, and to get an idea of what other people are thinking about these helicopters in the simulations. They are getting better, and it's going to be interesting to see how their development continues. I would love to see what we would consider study level helicopters in X-Plane 11, and I'm hope that's going to come. They're getting closer, but at this point I haven't found one that I would say is a true study level helicopter. Flight characteristics, flight dynamics, it's going to take a real effort, but at the same time, if we have these developers that are willing to do that, I think it'll bring more people into the fold of the flight simulator. People like myself and CajunJosh that we love helicopters. I love aviation as a whole, and that's why I do a lot of flying and fixed wing as well. But my first love has always been and will continue to be helicopters. So this is Bugeater64, and until next time, I sure look forward to seeing you again when we get ready for our next flight. So until then, safe flying.